The dialect was supposed to be a ghost language, dead, untraceable, spoken only by old men in forgotten Sicilian villages. Ben Romano whispered it across the white tablecloth like a confession to God himself. Ci lumitiun ta fundazioni du ponti, ca si strozza colucimentu, which means, I put the rat in the foundation of the bridge, may he choke on the cement. The wineglass shattered before he even saw her hand move. When Annalisa Sanchez pointed her finger in his face, that perfectly manicured, trembling finger, and screamed back in the same dead tongue, the entire restaurant held its breath. The tattooed king of Miami's underworld, the man who'd clawed his way to the top of the syndicate with blood under his designer nails, did something he hadn't done since childhood. He froze, because the invisible waitress he'd been ignoring all night had just identified herself in 7 words. Cidu era me patri, tatuatu. That was my father, you tattooed loser. Before I begin, what time is it where you are listening from? Tell me in the comments. 24 hours earlier, Miami glittered like it always did, all chrome and neon and carefully hidden sins. Ben Romano sat in his penthouse, staring at his reflection in floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's houses. The face tattoos had been a statement, a middle finger to the old guard, to the wrinkled bosses who thought respect meant hiding in the shadows. Ben was the new blood, the syndicate's gamble on youth and brutality. At 32, he'd already disappeared 3 rivals and doubled the family's territory. Lorenzo Ferrari had been the last obstacle, the old man and his traditional values. Now he was cement. Across town, Annalisa Sanchez tied her apron for the evening shift at Loro Nero, her hand steady despite the exhaustion. 3 years she'd been pouring wine and smiling through insults. 3 years since her father vanished. The FBI handler had promised her, keep your cover, be patient. They'll slip eventually. She was tired of being patient. When the reservation came through, Romano party, booth 7, 8 p.m., Annalise felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, recognition. The hunter and the hunted, finally in the same room. Neither of them knew that by tomorrow one of their worlds would end. Ben Romano's knuckles were still bruised from the meeting with the Colombians when he walked into the syndicate's boardroom. And he didn't bother hiding them. In fact, he made sure everyone saw as he drummed his tattooed fingers against the mahogany table, a deliberate rhythm, like a countdown. The old men shifted in their seats. Good. Let them squirm. Gentlemen, Ben said, his voice carrying the particular softness of a man who'd never needed to shout to be terrifying. We have a rat problem. Salvatore Giordano, 73 and still clinging to his seat at the head of the table, cleared his throat. His eyes flickered to the ink crawling up Ben's neck, a rose intertwined with thorns, the petals bleeding into script that read, Sangue chiama sangue. Blood calls to blood. The old man had never approved of the tattoos, said they made Ben look like a common thug instead of a boss. Ben loved that it bothered him. The Ferrari situation, Salvatore began carefully, requires discretion. Lorenzo has friends, old alliances, if we move too quickly. Lorenzo Ferrari, Ben interrupted, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man half their age and twice as dangerous. Has been bleeding us dry for 6 months, skimming from the ports, talking to people he shouldn't be talking to. He paused, let the weight of that insinuation settle. You want to know what I think? I think old man Ferrari forgot which side of the war he's on. The room went quiet. Accusing a made man of being a federal informant wasn't something you did lightly. It was a death sentence, and everyone in that room knew it. But Ben had learned early that fortune favored the bold and the brutal. You have proof. This from Vincent Caruso, whose jowls shook when he spoke, like a bulldog defending a bone. Ben smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. The tattoo of a dagger on his cheekbone seemed to glint in the recessed lighting. I have enough, and more importantly, I have initiative. He stood, buttoning his Armani suit jacket with those bruised, lethal hands. The vote was yesterday, Vinny. This is a courtesy notification. Salvatore's face went purple. You can't just... I can. I did. Lorenzo Ferrari will be having an unfortunate accident tonight. Ben walked toward the door, then paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Oh, and gentlemen, next time you want to question my decisions, remember who tripled your profits in 18 months. Remember who solved the Delgado problem when you were all too scared to get your hands dirty. He tapped the tattoo on his temple, a crown of thorns, because subtlety had never been his strong suit. I'm not the old guard. I'm the new order. Get used to it, or get out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt more final than a gunshot. 3 hours later, Ben sat in the back of a black Escalade outside a marina in South Beach. His consigliere, Samuel Martini, was in the passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear. Through the tinted windows, Ben watched Lorenzo Ferrari's silhouette moving on his boat, a 60-foot yacht called Fortuna. How poetic. He's alone, Samuel said, ending the call. Wife's at her sister's. Bodyguard got food poisoning. He smirked. Funny how that works. Ben cracked his knuckles, studying the bruises. They'd faded to a sickly yellow-green. By tomorrow, they'd be gone entirely. Just another ghost. You bring the chains? In the trunk. Heavy duty. Or the kind they use for anchors. Samuel lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. You sure about this, Ben? Ferrari's got a daughter. She disappeared after the family collapsed, but still. Loose ends. Annalise. Ben rolled the name around in his mouth like a bitter wine. He'd done his homework. She's been gone for 5 years, probably shacked up with some accountant in Iowa, trying to forget she's got mob blood. Even if she cared, she's got no pull, no connections. She's nobody. The confidence in his voice was absolute. Ben Romano didn't make mistakes. He made examples. Besides, he continued, watching Lorenzo move around the deck, oblivious to the wolves circling. After tonight, there won't be enough left of dear old Dad to identify. Cement has a way of making problems permanent. Samuel whistled low. The new bridge construction on 4th? Poetic justice. Ferrari always loved infrastructure projects. Now he gets to be part of one. Ben opened the car door, the Miami heat hitting him like a physical wall. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing more ink. Snakes and skulls and saints, a canvas of violence and devotion. Let's go introduce the old guard to the new world order. The yacht rocked gently in the dark water, waiting. Annalise Sanchez had perfected the art of invisibility. It wasn't difficult. People like the ones who dined at Loro Nero didn't see the help. They saw moving furniture, bodies that brought food, cleared plates, refilled wine glasses and disappeared. Ghosts in white shirts and mustard yellow skirts, there to serve a purpose and nothing more. She'd been counting on that for 3 years. The lunch shift was winding down when Table 12 snapped his fingers at her. Investment banker type. Rolex catching the light. Cologne expensive enough to make her eyes water. His date, definitely not his wife, based on the tan line on his ring finger, giggled at something he'd said. Sweetheart, he called out, not bothering to look up from his phone. This water's warm. Bring me a fresh glass. With ice this time. You'd think that wouldn't be complicated. Annalise smiled. The expression didn't reach her eyes, but he wouldn't notice. Of course, sir, right away. She collected the offending glass. The water was perfectly cold, condensation still beading on the outside, and headed towards the service station. As she passed Table 7, she palmed the cocktail napkin someone had left behind. The one with a phone number scrawled in expensive ink. The name above it read, Caruso, Vincent Caruso, syndicate underboss. One of the men who'd been in the room when they voted on her father's fate. The napkin disappeared into her apron pocket, joining the others. In the kitchen, she grabbed fresh ice water and stood for a moment in the blast of the industrial freezer, letting the cold air clear her head. Her hands were steady as she pulled out a small notebook from behind the industrial-size mayonnaise jars, her hiding spot for 3 years, and added the entry, Caruso, 555-0147, frequents table 7, usually Thursdays, allergic to shellfish. Small details, puzzle pieces. Eventually they'd form a picture. Annalise, table 15 needs the check. Samuel, the floor manager, barked from the doorway. He was perpetually stressed, perpetually sweating through his shirt. And Mrs. Chen wants to speak to you about her osso buco. She closed the notebook, tucked it back behind the mayo. What's wrong with it? How should I know? Just smile and apologize. That's what you're good at. The smile came automatically now. Practiced. Perfect. Of course. Mrs. Chen's complaint was that the meat was too tender, a problem Annalise solved by offering a complimentary dessert and nodding sympathetically while the woman monologued about her recent divorce. 45 minutes of her life she'd never get back, but Mrs. Chen left a 30% tip and a business card. Annalise studied the card as she bussed the table. Chen and Associates, corporate law. Another napkin note, Mrs. Chen, table 11, divorcing a hedge fund manager, hates the Rossini family. Mentioned them by name. The Rossinis ran numbers in Little Havana, competitors to the syndicate. Everything connected eventually. You just had to be patient enough to watch the threads. Hey, waitress! Table 18 this time. Loud, drunk at 3 p.m., gold chain thick enough to anchor a boat. His buddies laughed at whatever joke she'd missed. Yeah, you. Bring us another round. And smile more, honey. You look miserable. Annalise walked over, her pen poised above her pad. Up close, she could see the scar on his wrist. 3 parallel lines. Prison tattoo. Poorly done. What can I get you, gentlemen? 4 more whiskeys. The good stuff, not the swill you served last time. He leaned back, appraising her like meat. You got a boyfriend, sweetheart? I'll get those drinks right away. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to make his point. I asked you a question. The restaurant seemed to recede. For a moment, Annalise wasn't in Loro Nero. She was 17 again, watching her father's colleagues crowd their dining room, demanding to know where Lorenzo Ferrari had gone, their hands on her mother's shoulders, their voices escalating. The smell of cigar smoke and expensive cologne and barely contained violence. She'd learned then that men like this only understood one language. Annalise looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Her voice dropped low enough that only he could hear. Sir, you have 3 seconds to let go before I break every finger you're touching me with. Then I'll bring your drinks, you'll leave a 20% tip, and we'll both pretend this didn't happen. Something in her eyes must have convinced him. Maybe it was the steadiness. Maybe it was the absolute absence of fear. His hand released, and he forced a laugh. Just playing around. Lighten up. She walked away, feeling his stare burning into her back. In the bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and allowed herself 60 seconds. 60 seconds to press her forehead against the cool metal door and breathe. To remember why she was here. To see her father's face the last time she'd hugged him. Stellina mia, I'll be home for dinner. He never came home. Annalise pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she'd collected. Surveillance shots of syndicate members, license plates, meeting locations. 3 years of hunting. And she was finally close. Tomorrow, Ben Romano had a reservation. Tomorrow, the invisible woman would finally be seen. The reservation came through at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. while Annalise was polishing wine glasses in the pre-dinner lull. She heard Samuel's voice rise from his office, not quite a shout, but close, and watched him hurry out to huddle with Giuseppe, the owner. Giuseppe only came down from his office for 2 reasons: health inspections or very important guests. Annalise kept polishing, head down, ears open, a skill she'd perfected. "Once booth 7, the private one," Samuel was saying, wringing his hands like he always did when he was nervous. 8 p.m. tomorrow. Party of 4. He specifically requested, "Give him whatever he wants." Giuseppe interrupted. The old man's face had gone pale beneath his permanent Mediterranean tan. "Wine, food, women, if he asks. We do not disappoint, Ben Romano." The wineglass slipped. Annalise caught it before it hit the floor, but her hands had started trembling. She set it down carefully, precisely, and forced herself to keep breathing. "Ben Romano. Here, tomorrow. Maria will take the table," Giuseppe continued. "She's our best, most experienced. Maria called in sick. Her daughter has the flu." Samuel checked his tablet, swiping frantically. "I could ask Stephanie." "Stephanie spilled wine on Councilman Herrera last week. Absolutely not." Giuseppe paced, a short man whose anxiety made him seem even smaller. "We need someone perfect, someone who won't shake, won't stare, won't do anything to make Mr. Romano uncomfortable." Annalise's mind was racing. 3 years she'd been waiting. 3 years of watching low-level associates and underbosses, collecting scraps, building her case. But Romano was the crown jewel. The man who'd risen to power right around the time her father disappeared. The new face of the syndicate. The man who knew something. She was sure of it. "I'll take it." The words came out before she'd fully processed the decision. Both men turned to stare at her like she'd grown a second head. "Excuse me?" Giuseppe's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. Annalise set down the glass and walked over, keeping her posture submissive, her voice soft. The invisible woman asking for a favor, not making a demand. "I'll take table 7 tomorrow. I know I'm not as experienced as Maria, but I've been studying the wine list. I won't make mistakes." Samuel laughed, the sound brittle with stress. "Annalise, this isn't serving the theater crowd. This is Ben Romano. Do you know who that is? A very important guest who deserves excellent service," she recited, meeting his eyes with practiced earnestness. "I won't let you down. Please, I need the tips." She let a note of desperation creep into her voice. Real desperation, just redirected. "My rent went up. I'm behind. A table like this could make my whole month." It was a lie. The FBI paid her rent. But men like Samuel and Giuseppe understood financial desperation. It was a language everyone in Miami spoke. Giuseppe studied her for a long moment. She could see him calculating the risk of an inexperienced server versus the hassle of finding someone else on short notice. "You've worked here how long?" 3 years. Never missed a shift. Never had a complaint." That last part wasn't quite true, but close enough. "She is reliable," Samuel admitted reluctantly. "And she does that thing where she disappears. The guests like that. They can talk freely." Yes, Annalise thought. They can talk freely. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Giuseppe sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine. But Annalise, you listen to me very carefully." He stepped closer, his
not
voice
like other
dropping
guests.
to a whisper.
You
that
do not speak
somehow
unless
felt
spoken to.
more threatening.
You do not
than a
ask
shout.
questions.
You do
Ben
not
Romano-
make eye contact for longer than necessary. You are a ghost. You bring food. You pour wine. You disappear. Understand? Yes, sir. If you spill anything, if you hesitate, if you do anything to make him uncomfortable, you're fired. And that's if you're lucky. The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Giuseppe might own a restaurant, but he paid protection money like everyone else. He knew exactly what men like Romano were capable of. "I understand completely," Annalise said. And she did, just not in the way he thought. Giuseppe waved her away. "Go, practice the wine pairings, memorize the specials, and for the love of God, get some sleep. I don't want you looking tired tomorrow." Annalise nodded and retreated to the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. She waited until both men had disappeared before pulling out her phone and stepping into the walk-in freezer, where the security cameras had a blind spot. The FBI handler picked up on the second ring. "It's me," Annalise said quietly, watching her breath fog in the cold air. "Oh, Romano's coming in tomorrow night. Booth 7. I'm serving him." A pause. "Annalise, we discussed this. You're intelligence gathering only. You don't engage—" "I'm not engaging. I'm doing my job." She kept her voice steady, professional. "But if he says something, if there's an opportunity—" "You do nothing. You report. That's the deal." She closed her eyes, saw her father's face, heard his voice reading her bedtime stories in Sicilian, the old dialect his grandmother had taught him. "Stellina mia." "Understood," she lied. Tomorrow the hunter and the hunted would finally meet, and only one of them knew they were in danger. Ben Romano arrived at Loro Nero like a king entering his kingdom, late, loud, and utterly unconcerned with the ripple of nervous energy that preceded him through the restaurant. And Annalise watched from the service station as the hostess practically genuflected while leading his party to booth 7. 4 men, all in suits expensive enough to pay her rent for a year. Ben was easy to spot. The tattoos made sure of that. Even in the dim, romantic lighting of the restaurant, the ink on his face seemed to writhe like living things. She'd seen his photograph in the files, surveillance shots, grainy and distant. But in person, he was different, younger than she'd expected, handsome in a dangerous way that made smart people cross the street, the kind of man who smiled before he pulled the trigger, the kind of man who'd killed her father. Her hands steadied as she picked up the wine list. 3 years of practice, 3 years of wearing someone else's face. She could do this. "Table 7. Samuel hissed, appearing at her elbow. "They're ready for drinks. Don't screw this up." Annalise approached the booth with her eyes downcast, the picture of submissive service. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Loro Nero. May I start you with something to drink?" Ben didn't even look at her. He was laughing at something Samuel Martini had said, his consigliere grinning like a shark. The other 2 men, muscle, clearly, sat silent and watchful. "Whiskey," Ben said, waving a tattooed hand dismissively. "The expensive stuff. None of that bottom-shelf garbage, and keep it coming." "Excellent choice, sir. May I suggest the Pappy Van Winkle 23 year? It's—" "I don't need suggestions, sweetheart. I need whiskey, 4 glasses, now." She nodded and disappeared, her face burning. Not from embarrassment, from rage that she had to swallow like poison. But the night progressed in a blur of plates and bottles. Ben's party ordered everything, oysters, wagyu, lobster, and barely touched half of it. They were there to be seen, to remind everyone in the restaurant who owned Miami's underworld. Ben drank steadily, his laughter growing louder with each pour. By the 3rd bottle of whiskey, his jacket was off, his tie was loosened. The tattoos on his neck seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. Or maybe that was just Annalise's imagination, her hatred giving them life. "More wine!" Martini called out, snapping his fingers. She brought a Barolo, 2015, decanting it with practiced precision. As she poured, she heard fragments of their conversation. Sports betting. A shipment coming in from Caracas. Someone named Paulie who'd screwed up a collection. Nothing useful, nothing she could use. Then Ben's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted, something darker sliding behind his eyes. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Business." He stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear, and Annalise watched him pace near the restrooms. When he returned 5 minutes later, he was looser, almost giddy. "That," he announced, dropping back into the booth, "was confirmation. Our friend has been permanently retired." Martini raised his glass. "To new beginnings. To removing obstacles," Ben corrected, and they drank. The muscle men excused themselves to smoke, leaving Ben and Martini alone in the booth. This was the moment Annalise had been waiting for. When the bodyguards were gone and the liquor had loosened tongues, she approached to clear their appetizer plates, moving slowly, silently. Ben leaned toward Martini, his voice dropping, but not low enough, not for what came next. "You should have seen his face, Samuel," Ben said, switching seamlessly into Sicilian. "The old dialect, the one from the mountain villages, the one nobody spoke anymore." When he realized what was happening, L'uomo vecchio, the old man, he actually tried to beg. Annalise's hands froze on the plate. The dialect crashed over her like a wave. Her grandmother's voice, her father's bedtime stories, the language of her childhood. Martini chuckled, responding in the same tongue. "Tutti li gadini tornano o palummaru. All chickens come home to roost." "I put him exactly where he belonged." Ben continued, his words slurring slightly with drink and satisfaction. "Ci lumitio unta fondazione du ponti, ca si strozza cu lucimento. I put the rat in the foundation of the bridge. Ah, may he choke on the cement." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The new bridge on 4th. They poured concrete yesterday. By now, old Ferrari is part of Miami's infrastructure. Poetic, no?" The plate slipped from Annalise's fingers. The crash was deafening in the sudden silence. Porcelain exploding across marble tile, oyster shells scattering like shrapnel. Every head in the restaurant turned. But Annalise didn't notice. She was 17 again, waiting by the window. Her father had promised to be home for dinner. They were supposed to go to his favorite spot, the overlook by the bridge on 4th Street, where you could see the whole city lit up like stars. He never came home. And now she knew why. Her vision tunneled. The restaurant disappeared. All she could see was Ben Romano's face, those tattoos, that smirk, and the casual cruelty of a man who'd murdered her father and bragged about it over a $60 steak. Something inside her snapped. The world contracted to a pinpoint of white-hot rage. Annalise could hear her grandmother's voice, crystal clear across the years. "U sangue non diventa acqua, Stellina. Blood doesn't become water. Never forget who you are." She'd forgotten. For 3 years, she'd been nobody. The invisible woman, the ghost who brought wine and cleared plates and smiled through insults. She'd buried Annalise Ferrari so deep that sometimes she forgot the girl had ever existed. But blood doesn't become water. And blood was all she could see now. Ben Romano was still laughing, wiping whiskey from his lips with the back of his hand. The tattoo on his knuckles, King, seemed to mock her. Martini was grinning, oblivious, reaching for the bottle to pour another round. Neither of them had noticed her yet. Neither of them had registered the broken plate or the waitress standing frozen beside their table. They didn't see her. They never saw her. "Au revoir," Annalise said quietly. Her voice came out steady, cold, each syllable carved from ice. "You." Ben's head turned slowly. His eyes, dark, predatory, still glazed with alcohol, found her face for the first time all evening. She watched him try to process what he was hearing. A waitress, speaking Sicilian. The confusion flickered across his features like a glitch. "Cidu era me patri." That was my father. The words hung in the air between them. Ben's smile faltered. Martini's hand froze halfway to his glass. "What did you—" Ben started, switching back to English. But Annalise was done with English. Done with hiding. Done with being invisible. Opontin sa quarta! Her voice cracked like a whip across the restaurant. The bridge on 4th. Uso postu favoritu! His favorite place. She was screaming now, every eye in the restaurant locked on her, but she didn't care. 3 years of silence erupted like a broken dam. She pointed at Ben with a shaking finger, stepping closer to the booth, her whole body vibrating with fury. Lu sipilistin documentu omitu! You buried him in wet cement, you coward! The Sicilian poured out of her, perfect and precise. Her father's dialect, her grandmother's prayers, the language of Sunday dinners and lullabies, and everything she'd lost. Every word was a knife, every syllable an accusation. Pinsasti canudu sapessi, canudu capiva? Caputisi ammazzari, nomu onoratu, e vantariti comu un cani. You thought no one would know, that no one understood, that you could murder an honorable man and brag about it like a dog? Ben's face had gone white beneath the tattoos. He shot to his feet, the booth table rattling as his knee struck it. The whiskey bottle tipped, amber liquid spreading across white linen like blood. Who the hell are you? His hand moved inside his jacket, muscle memory reaching for a weapon. But Annalise was beyond fear, beyond calculation. She'd spent 3 years being careful, being smart, following protocol. 3 years choking on rage and grief while she smiled and poured wine for the men who'd destroyed her family. No more. Annalise Ferrari. She screamed her name like a war cry, like an identity reclaimed from the grave. Figia di Lorenzo Ferrari, Lomuca Amazzasti! Daughter of Lorenzo Ferrari, the man you murdered. The restaurant had gone silent. Forks suspended mid-air, wine glasses forgotten. Even the kitchen staff had emerged, drawn by the commotion. Giuseppe stood in the doorway of his office, his face a mask of pure terror. Martini was on his feet now too, his hand definitely on a gun. Ben, we need to... Ci lumitiunta fondazioni du ponti. Annalise mimicked savagely, throwing Ben's own words back at him with perfect inflection. I put him in the foundation of the bridge. Casi strozza colu cimentu. May he choke on the cement. She took another step closer, her voice dropping to something lethal and cold. Lu grammatica è sbagliata, strunzu. Si dice ca si strozzi, no si strozza. Congiuntivo presente. Un pezzo di tatuatu. Your grammar is wrong. It's may he choke, present subjunctive. You tattooed criminal. It was absurd, correcting a killer's grammar while accusing him of murder. But something about it broke through Ben's shock. His eyes focused, really focused, and she watched him see her. Not the waitress, her. The family resemblance was there if you knew to look. Her father's sharp cheekbones, her grandmother's fierce dark eyes, the Ferrari nose, the Ferrari temper. Ben's hand emerged from his jacket, gripping a pistol. And Annalise smiled. Because she'd just gotten a Mafia boss to pull a weapon in a crowded restaurant full of witnesses while confessing to murder in a dead language he thought no one else spoke. The wire taped beneath her uniform felt like a brand against her skin. Ariristatu, she said softly. Checkmate. Ben Romano had killed 17 men in his 32 years. He'd done it with guns, with knives, once memorably with a boat anchor and 50 feet of chain. He'd looked into dying eyes and felt nothing but satisfaction. The cold certainty that he was stronger, smarter, untouchable. Fear was something other people felt, something he inflicted. But standing in booth 7 of Loro Nero, his hand wrapped around a Glock he couldn't use, staring at a waitress who'd just destroyed his world in 7 languages, Ben Romano felt fear for the first time since childhood. His free hand came up involuntarily, clutching at his face as if he could physically hold himself together. The restaurant had gone tomb silent. Even the kitchen exhaust fan seemed to have stopped. 100 pairs of eyes watching, 100 witnesses to his confession. And her, still standing there, still glaring at him with those eyes, those Ferrari eyes. The resemblance slammed into him like a freight train. How had he not seen it before? The sharp angles of her face, the defiant tilt of her chin, the way she held herself even now. Proud, unbroken, dangerous. Lorenzo Ferrari had stood exactly like that on the yacht, even with chains around his ankles, even when he knew he was dying. "You're making a mistake," the old man had said. "My daughter." Ben had laughed. "Your daughter ran away 5 years ago. She's nobody. She's nothing." But Lorenzo had smiled. Even then, even facing death, he'd smiled. "You don't know my Stellina. You think you do, but you don't. She's got her nonna's fire, her mother's patience, and my memory." Then the cement. Now that smile made terrible sense. Ben's fingers pressed harder against his cheekbone, feeling the tattoo ink beneath his skin. The dagger, the crown of thorns, all the symbols of power that suddenly felt like children's drawings. His mouth had gone dry. The whiskey churning in his stomach threatened to come back up. "You're dead," he heard himself say. His voice sounded wrong, thin, reedy, nothing like the confident growl he'd used to order Lorenzo's execution. "You disappeared. 5 years. You're supposed to be gone." Annalise's smile was her father's smile, cold, patient, victorious. "I was never gone," she said, still in Sicilian, her voice carrying across the silent restaurant like a bell. "Stava aspettanu, accumugianu, imparanu." I was waiting, gathering, learning. Martini grabbed Ben's arm. "Boss, we gotta move. Now, we can still—" But Ben couldn't move. Heine's body had locked up, every muscle rigid. The Glock felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He stared at Annalise and saw his entire empire crumbling. Every carefully constructed lie, every bribe paid, every judge bought, every cop on payroll. All of it falling apart because he'd gotten drunk and sloppy and bragged in a language he thought was safe. The 2 bodyguards burst back in from their smoke break, hands already reaching for weapons. They saw their boss frozen, saw the standoff, saw the crowd of witnesses. Their training kicked in. Secure the asset, eliminate the threat, control the situation. But which situation? A restaurant full of Miami's elite, all of them now staring at Ben Romano like he was a monster. Because he was. And they'd all just heard him admit it. Ben's mind raced through scenarios. "Shoot her! Everyone scatters!" They escape in the chaos. But there were cameras. Phones. In the age of social media, someone was definitely recording. And the syndicate's #1 rule was discretion. Salvatore would have his head for this kind of exposure. Don't shoot her. But then what? She knew. She'd understood every word. She could testify, could identify him, could— His eyes dropped to her uniform, really looked at it for the first time. The white shirt was pristine except for a small bulge near the collar. Too geometric to be natural, too perfectly placed. His gaze traveled down to where her hand rested against her apron. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't nervous. She was waiting, like someone counting down. "No," Ben whispered. The word came out broken. His hand fell from his face, leaving red marks where his fingers had pressed. No. I know!" Annalise cocked her head, studying him with those Ferrari eyes. When she spoke, it was in English for the first time since the world had ended. Clear, carrying, meant for the recording device she wore like a second skin. "Yes," she said simply. Ben looked around the restaurant with new eyes. The businessman in the corner, too alert, hand near his jacket. The couple by the window, wrong body language, too focused. The bartender who'd been polishing the same glass for 10 minutes. How many? How many were feds? His knees buckled. Martini caught him, but barely. The great Ben Romano, the king of Miami, the man who'd clawed his way to the top of the syndicate with blood and brutality, was collapsing in a booth of his favorite restaurant. All because of a waitress. All because he'd thought he was safe. All because fear was something other people felt. Until now, the moment stretched like taffy, sweet and poisonous. Ben's collapse lasted only seconds before survival instinct kicked in. He straightened, his face hardening into the mask that had terrified rivals and subordinates alike. The fear didn't disappear. Annalise could see it swimming beneath the surface like something drowned, but discipline reasserted itself. His eyes flicked to Martini, then to the bodyguards flanking the booth's entrance. The signal was subtle, a slight nod, a tightening of his jaw. But Annalise had spent 3 years learning the language of violence. She knew what came next. Her hand shot out, closing around the steak knife someone at the adjacent table had abandoned mid-meal. The blade was small, serrated. It probably couldn't kill anyone unless she got very lucky and very desperate. But that wasn't the point. The point was visibility. "Everyone stay exactly where you are?" Annalise's voice rang out in English now, clear and commanding. She held the knife at her side, not threatening, but present, a line drawn. This man just confessed to murder. You all heard it. The businessman in the corner, definitely FBI, she knew him by code name only, Overwatch, was already standing, his hand inside his jacket. But he couldn't breach yet. Not until the signal. Not until she said the word. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Ben's bodyguards moved closer, one on each side, boxing her against the booth. Large men, professional, the kind who'd done this before, the kind who knew how to make problems disappear quietly. "Miss," the one on her left said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You need to put the knife down. You're upset. We understand. But you don't want to do something you'll regret." "Regret?" Annalise laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. She raised her voice, projecting to the back of the restaurant where a family celebrating a birthday had frozen mid-song. "This man, Ben Romano, murdered Lorenzo Ferrari, put him in wet cement in the foundation of the new bridge on 4th Street. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's wine glass shattered. "He just confessed," Annalise continued, turning slowly, making eye contact with as many diners as possible, making them complicit, making them witnesses. "All of you heard it. He said it in Sicilian because he thought no one would understand. He thought he was safe." Ben found his voice. "She's insane. I'm delusional." He spread his hands in a gesture of innocence that might have worked on someone who hadn't watched him clutch his face in terror 30 seconds ago. "I don't even speak Sicilian. This woman is clearly having some kind of breakdown. Cilumitiunta fondazioni du ponti," Annalise screamed, throwing his exact words back at him. "Those were your words. You said you put the rat in the foundation of the bridge. You said Lorenzo Ferrari deserved to choke on cement." The restaurant erupted in chaos, chairs scraping, people standing. Someone was definitely filming now. She could see the phone screens glowing in the dim light like fireflies. Perfect. "And you!" Annalise whirled on Martini, the knife still in her hand. "Samuel Martini, consigliere to the syndicate. You laughed. Ah, you toasted to removing obstacles. You're an accessory to murder." Martini's face went purple. His hand disappeared into his jacket. "Gun!" someone screamed. The restaurant descended into pandemonium. People dove under tables. The hostess was crying. Giuseppe had disappeared entirely, probably calling 911 or praying or both. Ben's bodyguards lunged for Annalise simultaneously. She was ready. The first one grabbed for the knife. She let him take it. It was never about the weapon. As he secured her wrist, she used the momentum to spin, putting him between her and Martini's gun. Her voice never stopped, never wavered. Lorenzo Ferrari was a good man, a father. He had a daughter who loved him. She was shouting over the chaos, over the screaming, making sure every word carried. And Ben Romano killed him because he wanted power. Because he's a coward who murders old men and brags about it over whiskey? The second bodyguard got an arm around her waist, trying to haul her towards the kitchen exit. The side door, the place where witnesses disappeared. But Annalise had 3 years of rage fueling her. She thrashed, kicked, her voice rising to a shriek. "He's trying to kill me too, right now, in front of all of you, because I'm the only one who knows where the body is." "Shut her up," Ben roared, all pretense of innocence abandoned. He had his own gun out now, not pointing it at anyone specific, but the threat was clear. "Get her out of here, now!" The bodyguard's hand clamped over her mouth. Annalise bit down. Hard, tasted blood. He swore, jerking back, and in that half-second of freedom she screamed the words that mattered most. "Lorenzo Ferrari's daughter! And my name is Annalise Ferrari. If I disappear, if I die, you all know who did it." She'd turned herself into a problem that couldn't be solved with bullets. Not here, not now, not with this many witnesses and this many cameras. Ben knew it too. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the cost-benefit analysis of a man whose empire was burning down around him. "Please," she said, quieter now, looking directly at the diners, at the family with the birthday cake, at the elderly couple holding hands in terror, at the young professional who'd been on a first date. "Please remember my name. Remember what he said. Remember that you were here." The bodyguard's grip tightened again, lifting her off her feet. And Annalise looked at Ben Romano one last time and smiled, because she could feel the wire against her skin, and could imagine the FBI van outside, the recording equipment, the prosecutors who were probably already drafting warrants. She'd done it. She just had to survive the next 60 seconds. The bodyguard had Annalise 6 inches off the ground when Ben Romano's last thread of control finally snapped. It wasn't the screaming that did it. It wasn't even the witnesses or the cameras or the empire crumbling around him like wet sand. It was the smile. That Ferrari smile. The same one Lorenzo had worn on the yacht. The same one that said, "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." Ben had put a bullet in Lorenzo Ferrari to erase that smile. And here it was again, on his daughter's face, mocking him from beyond the grave. "No!" The word erupted from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond reason, and Ben grabbed the edge of the booth table with both hands, the pristine white linen, the spilled whiskey, the remnants of a $60 steak, and flipped it. The crash was spectacular. Crystal wine glasses exploded against marble. Plates shattered. The Barolo she'd so carefully decanted became a red lake spreading across the floor like a crime scene. The sound cut through the chaos, a punctuation mark that stopped everyone mid-motion. Annalise hit the ground as the bodyguard dropped her reflexively, his training screaming at him to protect the boss, not the witness. She rolled, came up on her knees in the spreading wine, her uniform soaked crimson. Ben stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, gun raised and pointing directly at her face. The restaurant went silent again. A different silence this time. Not shock, terror. "You're lying," Ben said. His voice came out strangled, desperate. The gun shook in his hand, barely, but enough. "You're a crazy girl making up stories. I didn't. You said you put him in the foundation." Annalise stayed on her knees, hands visible, non-threatening. But her voice was steel. "The bridge on 4th Street. You said he choked on cement. You said it in Sicilian. You said, 'Shut up!'" Ben's finger tightened on the trigger. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut the hell up!" Martini grabbed his arm. "Ben, don't! Not here! Not with all these—" Ben shook him off violently. "She's going to destroy everything. Don't you see? She's been here for 3 years. 3 years! Listening! Recording!" His eyes were wild now, the fear transforming into something more dangerous, cornered animal logic. "She knows everything. Everyone who comes here. Every conversation, every—" He stopped. stared at her, really processed what he'd just said. Recording. The word hung in the air between them like a guillotine. Annalise watched the realization spread across his face, watched the last of his control evaporate. This was the moment. This was what her handler had warned her about. The most dangerous moment, when a desperate man with nothing to lose decided to take everyone down with him. Ben's gun hand steadied. The shaking stopped. His face went blank. She knew that look. She'd seen it in the surveillance photos. The moment before the trigger pull. The moment when a human being decided another human being should stop existing. "You're wearing a wire," Ben said flatly. Not a question. A death sentence. "Ben, we can still—" Martini started. "She's FBI." Ben's voice was almost calm now, as the calm of a man who'd accepted the inevitable and decided to go out shooting. "She's been FBI this whole time, and we just gave her everything." He raised the gun higher, sighting down the barrel. His finger was on the trigger. Annalise could see it from where she knelt, the tension, the pressure point, the fraction of an inch between life and death. Around them, people were screaming, diving for cover, calling 911. But it was all background noise. All of it faded except for Ben's eyes and the black hole of the gun barrel and the choice Annalise had made 3 years ago to trade safety for justice. She'd known it might end like this. She'd known since the moment she walked into the FBI field office with a notebook full of evidence and a heart full of rage. Known that one day she might have to look down a gun barrel and decide if her father's memory was worth her life. It was. Annalise lifted her chin, met Ben Romano's eyes one last time. Then she looked down deliberately, slowly at the small bulge near her collar, the microphone, the wire, the evidence that would outlive them both. When she looked back up, she smiled that Ferrari smile and said one word. "Now." The windows exploded inward, glass and frame and darkness, a percussion of controlled violence that turned the romantic ambiance of Loro Nero into a war zone. Flashbangs detonated, 3 of them, positioned perfectly to disorient without injuring civilians. The world went white, then deafening. Tactical teams poured through every entrance, FBI, DEA, Metro Dade SWAT. For 3 years of warrants and wiretaps and careful evidence gathering, all culminating in this single moment. Ben pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, barely, ricocheting off marble as a tactical officer hit him from the side. The gun skittered across wet floor. Martini went down under a pile of Kevlar and badges. The bodyguards raised their hands, their professional instincts telling them this fight was already over. And Annalise stayed on her knees in the spilled wine, hands over her ears, watching Ben Romano get slammed face first into the floor of the restaurant, where he'd confessed to murdering her father. Watching justice arrive 3 years late, but arriving nonetheless. The chaos was choreographed violence, precise, practiced, overwhelming. Tactical officers in black moved through Loro Nero like a flood, weapons raised, voices barking commands that cut through the ringing in everyone's ears. Red laser sights painted the walls, the floor, the faces of Miami's elite frozen in various stages of panic. Ben Romano didn't go quietly. Even with 3 officers on top of him, even with his face pressed into marble still wet with wine and his own blood, he thrashed, screaming incoherently, curses in English and Italian and guttural sounds that weren't quite language. The careful mask he'd worn, the king's crown he'd tattooed on his knuckles, all of it stripped away until he was just a man. Cornered, caught, finished. "Lorenzo Ferrari!" Annalise shouted over the chaos, still on her knees, her voice raw. She needed him to hear it, needed him to understand. "You murdered Lorenzo Ferrari, and his daughter watched you confess." Ben's head twisted toward her, a cheek scraping against marble. His eyes found hers one last time. No fear now, just hate, pure, distilled, impotent rage. "Rot in hell," he spat, blood from a split lip mixed with wine on the floor. "After you," Annalise said quietly. They hauled him up, hands cuffed behind his back, the tattoos on his face and neck looking suddenly pathetic under the harsh LED lights the tactical teams had brought. The crown of thorns, the dagger, the words king across his knuckles, now pressed together in steel bracelets. A king dethroned. Martini was already cuffed, his expensive suit torn at the shoulder. The bodyguards were compliant, professional even in arrest. They knew how this worked. Lawyers would be called, bail would be posted, the machine would grind on. But Ben Romano wouldn't see daylight for decades, maybe never. Or 3 years of wire recordings, hundreds of hours of conversations, and tonight, the crown jewel, a confession to murder, spoken in a dead language, preserved digitally forever. Checkmate. Special Agent Reina Vasquez appeared through the smoke and chaos like an avenging angel, her badge hanging from a chain around her neck, her weapon still drawn. She'd been Overwatch in the corner all evening, nursing a single glass of wine for 3 hours, watching, waiting. She reached Annalise and crouched down, her free hand gentle on Annalise's shoulder. "You okay?" Annalise nodded, though her whole body was starting to shake now that the adrenaline was crashing. "I'm okay." "You were supposed to wait for the signal," Rena said, but there was no anger in it, just exhaustion and maybe a trace of admiration. "You were supposed to let him finish dinner and leave. We'd have picked him up at his car." "He confessed to my father's murder." Annalise's voice cracked. "He told me exactly where the body is. I couldn't just let him walk out." Rena helped her to her feet. Annalise's legs felt like water, but she stayed upright. Around them, the restaurant was being processed like a crime scene. Photos, statements, officers separating witnesses. Giuseppe was in the corner having what looked like a nervous breakdown. Samuel was trying to explain to a detective that he'd had no idea, he'd just managed the floor, he didn't know anything. Nobody ever knew anything. "The bridge on 4th, Annalise said. "The new construction. He said the cement was poured yesterday." Rena was already on her radio, calling it in. Recovery teams would be there by dawn, tearing apart fresh concrete to find what remained of Lorenzo Ferrari, to bring him home, to let him rest. Annalise reached up with shaking fingers and unpinned her name tag. The little plastic rectangle that said Annalise in corporate font. 3 years she'd worn it. 3 years of being invisible, of swallowing rage, of playing a role. She set it carefully on the overturned booth table, among the shattered glass and spilled wine. "I need to call my mother," she said. Rena nodded. "We'll need your statement. Full debrief. It's going to be a long night." "I know." Annalise started walking toward the exit, past the tactical teams, past Ben Romano being read his rights, past the witnesses who were just now starting to process what they'd seen. She pulled the wire from beneath her uniform as she walked, the adhesive pulling at her skin. She handed it to a tech without breaking stride. At the door she paused, looked back one last time. Ben was watching her. Even with officers on either side, even in handcuffs, his eyes tracked her movement. She expected hate, expected threats. But what she saw was something else. Something that looked almost like respect. The acknowledgement that passes between worthy opponents. He'd underestimated her. Thought she was furniture. Thought she was nothing. He'd learned otherwise. Annalise didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, then turned and walked out of Loro Nero for the last time. The Miami night air hit her like a baptism, hot, humid, alive with sirens and flashing lights. News vans were already arriving, drawn by the spectacle. Tomorrow she'd be famous. The undercover waitress who took down a Mafia boss. The daughter who avenged her father. But tonight, She was just Annalise Ferrari. Not invisible, not a ghost, just a woman who'd kept a promise. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed the number she'd memorized but rarely called. Her mother answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mama," Annalise said in Sicilian, the language of her childhood, the language of home. L'hai trovato e ci portiamo a casa." I found him, and we're bringing him home. On the other end of the line, her mother wept. And 3 years of hunting finally, mercifully, came to an end.